Welcome back, everybody, to more from the SAbleyes. Today I'm here with Jordan, and we're going to bring you a Malamar deck profile. How's it going, Jordan?
Not too bad, thank you. And Malamar is definitely a deck that I'm pretty confident talking about, and I think gets a lot of good cards moving into this new format. So I'm excited to show it off to you guys.
You played you're a Malamar player, are you, Jordan? You played it a couple times.
Yeah, once or twice, and this is actually a very similar list to what I've been running recently. So I've got quite a bit of experience with a list like this, even though I haven't tried out all of the new tools yet.
Yeah, I'm
So,
super excited for the new tools for Malamar. When I was going through looking at the all the new cards, every now and again I just brush past a psychic card from one of those new subsets, and I go, "Oh man, that's busted in Malamar." I was like, moving on. Sure, that won't be a
sure
problem.
is.
But yeah, we'll see what you've come up with, Jordan. So
Yep.
let's have a look.
We'll start off with the basic. We're playing a 4-4 line of Malamar, and I think that needs almost no explanation. If you've heard of a Malamar deck before, then you know it's going to be playing 4 of each of these cards. It's super important to get them, multiple of them as soon as you can, so you just really need to have 4 copies of each.
Yeah, I believe that's been the for quite a long time now. It's been the agreed upon count amongst all Malamar players unanimously. So, yeah, not really much of a change here.
Yep, and also another card that seems to be a unanimous 4 for most players is 4 copies of Jirachi. Maybe not quite as unanimous as the 4 for Malamar. Every now and again you see someone playing 3 Jirachi and you're like, oh, that's a bit low, but still probably fine, but we're going 4 with this list because Malamar is well known as being a little bit clunky at times, and I would say that Jirachi is the reason why it still works.
Yeah, I tend to agree. You need a lead Jirachi. You need it to help you find you an extra Pokemon search every turn, which is typically what it does. But sometimes it has to find you that Lily on the first turn, or just a Cynthia to get you going, even if it's not ideal. But yeah, you just need to be able that little bit of extra grab that Jirachi gives you in Malamar, and with all the switching cards we have access to, you can go through a couple of turns and then still go into the attacker, which is just one of the strengths of this deck because it abuses Jirachi so well.
And there's even some new cards that we can abuse Jirachi with, some new tools that we can search for Jirachi later on in the video. But for now, we'll keep going through the Pokemon. We've got the standard 2 copies of Giratina once again. Pretty unanimous decision for a Malamar deck. It's almost as if this is like a pretty standard Malamar list so far, Blake. Nothing too special going on so far.
Nothing special, nothing spicy just yet. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason these counts are pretty much agreed upon. It's just this deck's been around for almost 2 years now, so we still keep getting new stuff to add to it and make it better. And that's why it's still a top tier deck. And yeah, let's have a look at what the new stuff is that we can look forward to.
Yeah, there's definitely some new cool cards, and there's a few old ones as well. So we'll start with the basic ones out the way first. We're playing 1 copy of Mew because bench barrier is a pretty good ability. When you're playing Malamars and Jirachis that need to be safe on the bench, you want to have some protection for them down there. And of course, Life Power is actually a pretty broken attack for this deck where you're doing quite a bit of spread. Obviously, there's a lot of different Malamar variants at the moment. We are going for more of a MallyTags build with this list, so having those extra damage counters to spread around is pretty useful.
And I think it's so much stronger now, especially now that a lot of decks are going to be rotating from custom catcher to great catcher. Your Malamars are going to be so much safer now, and the only way people are going to be able to get to them if they're running the great catcher is with spread or snipes specifically. And having the Mew now is even more important now than it was before, because now you can completely wall out people's access to your Malamars.
Yeah, it's a very useful and important card to have. I would consider cutting it depending on the meta, but overall it's a pretty safe inclusion. And the other one I would say is a little bit meta dependent, but still pretty safe inclusion is the good old Mimikyu with Copycat, which is kind of just dependent on how good the attackers in the format are as to how good Copycat is. When decks like Reshizard are seeing a lot of play, Copy Flash Strike is super good. There are some decks that it's pretty useless against, but there's usually at least 1 or 2 decks in the format that Copycat is really busted against, and I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, and I think the thing about Mimikyu that's often overlooked is just that it's really nice to just have a 2 energy attacker in Malamar, even if it's not copying the best attack. Sometimes you just, your Malamars have been abused early, or you just didn't get to them quickly enough, and you don't have the 3 ready to fully power up a Giratina or whatever attacker you may need. And that's when Mimikyu can come in clutch for the 2 energy attack on Copycat. But I also just can't wait to be able to copycat a shiny flare from the new Breakzard tag team and search three specific cards after copying its attack. That sounds really fun to me.
Oh, that's so good. As much as I love to copy Flash Strike, do 230 damage, that does sound really tempting. So I'd be down for that. But that's it for the standard cards in Malamar. The rest of the three new Pokemon are pretty spicy and not necessarily spicy, but they're new, and that's the important part. And the first one is this Blacephalon. I'm actually not familiar with the attack name, but it's effectively
Right now,
Psi Power.
right now it's translated as a Depth Bomb, but I think it might be Fireworks Bomb.
Well, both of those are fine. I personally would be behind the idea of Death Bomb, but I'll settle for both. So it's basically Psi Power, but plus 1 energy cost, and you do 10 more damage, but it's got the busted effect of if your opponent has 3 prize cards remaining, then you do an additional 8 damage counter placement. So it's actually better than Espeon Deoxys' GX attack. And we've actually replaced Espeon Deoxys GX with this Blacephalon on this list. I think it's so good that I would even consider us 2 of count. But right now we've just got a 1 of, and you only really need it once per game. But if you ever get a second one, oh boy, the game's over.
I think so. Yeah, if Malamar wasn't already a pain to play against, it's probably the best deck at prize control maybe in the format. It's so hard to cheat prizes off Malamar, and it's so basically every game you're going to be able to declare Depth Bomb with this Blacephalon for 12 damage counters, and unless it's prized or unless you had to start with it and it's been knocked out early, there's nothing they can do to avoid it. And yeah, 12 damage counters with spell tags and Tina placements and stuff like that. That's just a ridiculous amount. And even for, like as you said, it's better than Mew. I think there's something to be said about having both the Blacephalon and the Deoxys tag team as options for spread, because I think between the two of them you could create an overwhelming amount of damage counters to win games because of the timing at which you use Blacephalon's Depth Bomb and obviously Deoxys tag team, which is typically used to take the last prizes. So I think a lot of the power was lost on Deoxys tag team because of Great Catcher now, so you can't just slam one on the bench, attach 3 to it and say, okay, here you go, let's see if you can accrue 2 custom catches if you even have them left. Now that a lot of decks are going to be running Great Catcher, that's not going to be a viable strategy anymore.
And that's exactly why I chose to go without the Espeon Deoxys GX in this deck, because I'd say the main matchup that was really busted in was the mirror match, where you could just bench it, put 3 energy on it, and then threaten the 6 energy GX attack next turn. It's not really going to be an option for a Malamar mirror now. If you bench that and you don't have game on board, then it can very easily just be gusted up in the 3 prizes down for your opponent. So Blacephalon definitely a better option there. But we've got some other cool Pokemon to include in this list, and this is one that I actually didn't realize was in the set until just recently, and that is the new Mimikyu. This card is arguably equally busted as Blacephalon, and actually has super good synergy with the Blacephalon, because the ability reads each of your opponents, or I think it's all Pokemon in play, sorry, for both players, but
Both players.
Every Pokemon EX or GX in play that has any damage counters on it, which is going to be most of them ideally, have no abilities. So this is effectively a power plant on a basic Pokemon, so you can't be having your power plants replaced and your opponent gets their abilities back. As long as this Mimikyu is alive, which is going to be likely thanks to your Mew and the lack of custom catches coming up in the new format, your opponent's really going to struggle to use all these busted abilities like SAbleyes GX, Zeraora GX.
Mew.
There's too many to name.
Mew
Mew's
is a big
the main
one for
one.
me because that deck has been super popular and it's been dancing around the way that Giratina deals with it with Power Plant by replacing Jirachi GX altogether with Weak Guard energy. And obviously Weak Guard still works against this Mimikyu, but obviously, you know, you can play as many stadiums as you like. Unless you can kill this Mimikyu, your Mew-Mews are never going to declare an attack again. You're going to have to find a new one every time you want to declare an attack.
Yeah, and the Mimikyu's ability is so easy to trigger when you've got spell tags, you've got both Mew and this Blacephalon, and this list is also playing Shrine of Punishment, so effectively any GX your opponent has on board is going to have a damage counter on it by the end of a turn or two, so it's a pretty busted ability in this build specifically, but just in general, it's a really good ability. I don't think the attack's worth mentioning. I think it does like 20 damage and confusion or something along those lines, but nothing too special going on there. But we do have one. Yes, sorry?
I was just going to say, I think there's something to be said that I think this Mimikyu is only good in Malamar because it backfires tremendously if you want to take this into something else that actually does rely on abilities. There are plenty of decks in the format that can spread damage counters or even play their own Mew. So one Psi Power on each of your key ability users can quickly disable your own board before, possibly more so than even you're doing to your opponent. So there's also the downside that obviously if it's an offensive ability like Mew Mew's is, then for at least, assuming Shrine is in play, then they still are able to get a turn out of their Mew Mew before it goes down, so they could Venom Shot or place damage counters to kill it. But I could possibly see this Mimikyu alone being the reason people still play Custom Catcher, because it's that much of a problem for a lot of decks to deal with.
Yeah, it certainly could be, and you're definitely right about it only being worthwhile in non-GX decks, and Malamar seems like the best of those. But we are actually playing one GX Pokemon in this deck still, and that is the brand new Megalopunny and Jigglypuff Tag Team GX, which is another one of the reasons why we've cut down on Espeon and Deoxys in this list. We've got our new big hitting tag team Pokemon now, which has a very busted attack, does 6 damage plus 6 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon EX or GX in play. Now, if you start to think about it in combination with Shrine of Punishment or Spell Tags, you can easily start to knock out some busted tag teams or Pokemon GX when they've only got, like, say, 2 GXs in play, which is good. They're going to have most of the time if they're playing any of the other big decks in the format. They're probably going to have at least 2. So you're going to be doing a solid 180 damage plus some Spell Tags and Shrines. You can get some really nasty knockouts, and the GX attack's pretty solid as well.
Yeah, this card's ridiculous. I honestly thought I misremembered the translation for this card. We've done, obviously, if you guys have been watching our content, you would have seen our Nagalord versus Charizard Breaks-In gameplay, and I was completely taken off guard by Mitch's copy of this and his Charizard Breaks-In. I actually misremembered it being 30 base power plus 60 for each bench GX Pokemon. But it's actually so much better than I remembered. This card is insane when you just think of typical board states from popular decks right now. Mew Mew, how many GXs do they have in play? Mew Mew on the active, couple Dedennes on the bench. That's 3, that's 240 damage, plus Spell Tag, Shrine of Punishment, whatever. That's going to happen, 270, it's 30 off. Reshizard, 270 HP. A Reshizard in the active, maybe a Heatran on the bench, a Dedenne, at least 1 or 2 Dedennes. They all run too many Dedennes for them not to be benched with, to be completely just destroyed by this Megalopunny. Pikarom, its entire field apart from Jirachi is EXs because of EXs and GXs because of Zeraora, Dedenne, other attackers, Pikarom and Alolan Raichu tag team. So I think if you use that against Pikarom, you're pretty much going to take a one-shot every time, unless they're acutely aware that you're playing this card. But it's just so ridiculous. I think this is going to be a real menace in the upcoming format, and I think every deck that has the required acceleration to put it into their list is going to put it into their list because it is just so strong.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention SAbleyes GX decks, which are going to be flooding the board with GXs as well. So the GX attack is actually really good in this deck as well. It's kind of a replacement for the 6 energy SPDO. It's costing 5 energy instead for this attack. 1 color plus 4 more. And it's really powerful, actually. You put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep and snipe 200 damage to the bench, which can obviously, you can set up to knock out anything if your opponent has, thanks to Spell Tag, Shrine, etc. You can really stamp your opponent low at the end of the game, block their abilities with Mimikyu, put them to sleep, knock out an important Pokemon on the bench, and if that doesn't win the game, then you can make it really hard for your opponent to close out a game once you've declared that GX attack. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, I'd say, even if you're not going for it too often. But that is going to wrap up the Pokemon line. We've got a few spicy new tools to play around with the Pokemon line, but the trainer line's got some new stuff as well. But we've got a lot of the old stuff, so we'll have to get through that first, because the support line's pretty boring. We're just sticking with the good old 4 Lily and 4 Cynthia. Not too much to say about this, but it works.
Yep, whatever works. Yeah, with Jirachi and the Pokemon search that we already have access to, nothing too special here. Once you set up, the deck sort of plays itself, so you just need to find the tools. So these supporters are enough to cover everything, and it's what Malamar's been surviving off of for a long time now.
I do think it's worth mentioning the new supporter card Clay. I think is definitely worth considering in this deck. I haven't gone with it yet because I don't think it's better than Lily or Cynthia. I don't think it's worth including extra space for more than these supporters as of right now. But in the future, I could see Clay being pretty useful in this deck, which, for those who don't know, I believe it's discard the top 7 cards of your deck and then keep all of the item cards that you discard and put them back into your hand. So it'll allow you to accelerate your Psychic Energy and your Guillotines into the discard pile, thin your deck out, and then keep all of your Pokemon search cards off the top 7. So it's kind of like a nice way to dig for Inkays a little deeper than you usually would. But of course, they've got the risk of you might end up discarding the Inkays that you would have searched for.
It's like a turbocharged bills. It's like like the best kind of bills for this deck, where everything that you'd probably prefer to not see off of the bills just goes into the discard, and that's usually a good thing. Like the worst thing you can see is Malamars and Inkays and your tech attackers off this. So largely the Pokemon, but obviously we got some new Pokemon recursion in this set. Which I believe you might be playing a copy of, but we'll get to that in the future, so it's not a bigger deal as it used to be.
Yeah, so if you did choose to play Clay in this list, you could very easily add a couple extra Pokemon recursion items to the list, and all of a sudden it wouldn't be too big an issue, but right now we're not going with that. And yeah, we'll move straight into the item cards. Once again, starting off pretty standard, we're sticking with good old 4 copies of Mysterious Treasure and 4 copies of Pokemon Communication for the search, because these are pretty good search cards for finding your Malamar lives as early as you can, and you want to have as thick a line as possible to take advantage of Stellar Wish as much as you can.
Yeah, until we get new search, this is going to be the 8 cards that you use to find your Pokemon. Unfortunately, Tag Whistle or Tag Call, I think it's officially Tag Call now because I've seen some pre-release footage and it's called Tag Call. So, unfortunately,
good to know.
Tag Call is not very good. It just gets mega low punny because we're not playing tag team supporters. So, whilst that is a good card, it's not worth dedicating just one card search for. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we're just sticking with the standard 4-4 for now, and also pretty standard is 3 copies of Switch, which is obviously going to have a lot of synergy with your Malamars, allow you to switch your attacker to the bench that you want to power up, hopefully bring a Jirachi active, get an extra use of Stellar Wish, and then all of a sudden you'll have access to the Pokemon that you've charged up onto the bench ready to go into the active spot. So a lot of utility for Switch. Once again, nothing too special to be said about it. Could be a 4 copy, could even be a 2 copy if you're feeling risky, so we've gone with 3 for the time being.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're playing Jirachi, you need to have at least 2 switches in your deck, plus your escape boards. But the higher the switch count, the more effective your Jirachis are going to be, especially when you're playing 4. The more Stellar Wishes you can have in your turns, then the better your setup's going to be. And Malamar's all about the setup, so as many switches we can afford to put in, we will put in. So 3 seems like the right number.
So first time for the list, we're actually going to be moving into a non-consistency trainer card, which is probably one of the more powerful cards in the list. We see 3 copies of Spell Tag, because Spell Tag just has so much synergy with everything this deck's trying to do. You're trying to spread damage to take advantage of your Mimikyu's ability. You're trying to set up cheeky knockouts with your Volcephalon, or maybe you're just trying to set up for one-hit KOs with your future Giratinas or whatever various attack you end up using. There's just so much you can do with this card if you plan out your damage counters correctly, and it's just really important to have it on the turns that's going to screw your opponent over the most.
Yeah, absolutely. The curious thing is that a lot of decks have been running 4 spell tags, but could you tell us why you're not running the 4 spell tags, Jordan, at the moment?
I certainly can, and that is actually because it was able to fit space for a new card we're playing in the list, which is kind of as a pseudo spell tag. We're playing one Lana's Fishing Rod, which is actually this Pokemon recovery card that you were mentioning just previously. It actually allows you to shuffle 1 Pokemon and 1 tool card from your discard pile into your deck. So not only is this going to act as that 4th spell tag that you want to get into your deck, but it's also going to be a way to refresh your one-of tech attackers. So say, for example, your Volcephalon, if you use it earlier, if it gets knocked out, you can have access to a second Volcephalon. If someone's targeting down that Mimikyu of yours, you can get it straight back into the deck and then search for it with a Mysterious Treasure or Pokecom, and all of a sudden your Mimikyu is going to be blocking your opponent again. And of course, all of the other one-of Pokemon is going to have the same benefit. You can use it to get an Inkay or Malamar as well, but for the most part, it's just so strong being able to use any of your utility attackers a second time.
I think it's the exact card Malamar had been missing. If you went all in aggression on killing Inkays and Jirachis early on. Malamar couldn't really recover from it because they're without Brock's Grit as the only option. Getting your Inkas back was pretty much essentially the same as giving up a turn. But now with the item-based recursion that we have now, that gets a Pokemon back. Also, it has the caveat and the cherry on top in being able to get yourself back another Escape Board or Spell Tag, which is just exceptional.
Yeah, and speaking of Escape Board, we are playing 2 copies, which is also going to be having good synergy with that last fishing rod. I'd say most of the time you're going to be prioritizing trying to get Spell Tag back if you can, but sometimes it's going to be useful to get that Escape Board back into your deck. It's a really important card to have at least one of at all times. Just one on a Jirachi is pretty important, which is why it's not as important as the Spell Tags, which you really do want to be trying to get 2, 3, maybe 4 of. Yep. But there are definitely games where you're going to have to discard or have your Escape Board knocked out early, so it's definitely a good safety net to be able to get a third one back into your deck.
Yeah, I can also see a lot of the times the Escape Board coming back just because you need to shuffle in a Pokemon early, and there's no Spell Tags, but there is Escape Boards in the discard, so you just shuffle in both of those because you can. So not as essential as Spell Tag, obviously, but yeah, just having that option is nice.
Reasonable. It certainly is. All right, moving on to one of the new and more powerful cards for this deck, and realistically for every deck. Only able to fit 2 copies at the moment, but that's all I think this deck really needs. We are playing 2 copies of Great Catcher, and I actually think this card itself is one of the biggest buffs that Malamar receives from this new set. Not only because it finally gives Malamar a realistic way to Gust, which is pretty important. Allows us to get away of not playing some of the sneaky cards like the Espeon Deoxys or the Esper that Old List used to play. We can get away with just playing Great Catchers now. Gives us some discarding options besides just Viridian Forest and Mysterious Treasure to get our energy into the discard pile. But in my opinion, the most important thing that this does is it removes Custom Catcher from most players' lists. So our bench Pokemon are going to be so much safer now.
Yeah, absolutely. There's obviously going to be a lot of decks that either run both or exclusively Custom Catcher because they want to have access to both. And they might be playing like greens or something like that, so it's just something that makes it super easy for them to search out the custom still. But yeah, the amount of custom catches is definitely going to drop significantly because of this card's existence in the format, and I can't say enough how much that just being able to target down the bench effectively is going to be good for Malamar, because setting up knockouts on your opponent's bench Pokemon with damage counters and finishing them off with a Giratina or a Lopunny is going to be so easy now. Because before, if you was trying to set up knockouts on the bench, it was all with damage counters. So now that we have a deck efficient way to put Gust in the deck, I can only see this deck becoming more and more just isolated in the top echelons of the tier of the format.
Yeah, it's crazy how much of a buff this card is to Malamar. So we've only got 1 item card left, and that is just a single copy of Reset Stamp. This is one of the cards that I had to cut to fit in some of these new cards, such as the Great Catcher. So I would have loved to have kept 2, but right now we're sitting at just 1. It does have a lot of synergy with this deck being primarily a non-GX deck. You can really force your opponent to get caught at 2, maybe even 1 prize card almost every single game, and then play a Reset Stamp to give you a chance of winning a game that you're in a bad position for. And it has so much good synergy with the new Mimikyu being able to show off your opponent's abilities. You can really steal games with Reset Stamps as 1 or 2, lock their abilities, attack, take a massive knockout, and your opponent's really going to struggle to come back from that.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as this card exists and there is no better option, Reset Stamp is going to find its way into every list just about. Because it's that impactful just as a comeback mechanism to reduce the amount of cards your opponent has access to on their turn, especially when they're close to winning the game. So, yeah, nothing more to be said about Reset Stamp.
Exactly. And finally, moving on to the last 2 cards, we've already kind of mentioned both of them already. So we've got 2 different Stadium cards, 2 Viridian Forest and 2 Shrine of Punishment. Both are incredibly important. Viridian Forest is obviously one of the key consistency cards in this deck. It's the reason why I think that getting a turn 2 attack off in this deck is pretty easy to do these days. Thanks to Viridian Forest, you only really need 1 energy and a Viridian Forest, or 1 energy and a Mysterious Treasure to get that crucial turn 2 Psychic Recharge into play. And the Shrine of Punishment almost acts as both a Shrine and a Power Plant now, thanks to Mimikyu. I was always kind of iffy onto which of those 2 Stadium cards I liked more in this list, because I think they're both super good. And Shrine kind of acts as both now, so I'm super excited to not only deal extra damage, but also lock my opponent's abilities with this card.
Yeah, absolutely. Shrine is just an insane card in this list now that we have that new Mimikyu. Yeah, going into your turn, you just shut off every ability on a GX Pokemon at the end of your turn. It's just that crazy. Obviously, the only downside to this new strength in stadiums is, of course, the new Chaos Swell, which is an overwhelmingly powerful new stadium card. It might see the increase in the play of the Reset Hole Marshadow, which is obviously super easy to search in this deck if you want your stadiums to be more effective, but
Yep.
I could see that card being super influential against Malamar just because of its reliance on stadiums and for fixing damage and of course shutting off abilities, but also just for pure consistency as well. So I could see that card being a problem for these decks.
Yeah, stadiums certainly are pretty important. Luckily for us, we do have access to, once again, we've got those spell tags, we've got the attackers that can spread damage, and most importantly, we still do have just good old Distortion Door to spread those damage and still at least get off our Mimikyu abilities onto the Pokemon we want them to.
Yeah.
But it certainly is going to be a little annoying dealing with Chaos Ball sometimes. Luckily, it's not too big a deal. And finally, we'll move on to the energy. We're playing a pretty standard line of energy, playing 8 Psychic Energy, 4 use of attachments and recharges, and 1 Recycle Energy just as an out to having your guaranteed attachment every turn. You are ideally going to be attacking with 6 different Pokemon back to back, and every single time you're probably going to need a manual attachment unless your board is really good. And I believe every Pokemon in this list right now attacks for a certain amount of Psychic Energy plus 1 colorless, if not all colorless energy. So the Recycle Energy is always going to be useful for us.
Yeah, if there is a card in the deck that doesn't attack for Psychic plus colorless energy, it's probably not a card you're supposed to be attacking with. So, the Recycle is it's a cute new addition that I think is really good at increasing consistency. It makes you much less reliant on Viridian City once you are set up. You don't need to use it to find your manual attachment every turn. As soon as the Recycle is in play, and you're not playing against Soul or anything like that, you're just going to have that energy bounce back into your hand and find your manual attachment every turn. So it's really nice.
Yeah, and so now that we're able to set up a lot of damage counters all around the place and kind of close out games a bit quicker with the Mega Lopunny and Jigglypuff, having that manual attachment just every turn is going to be super important. You can very easily lose games if you miss out on that manual attachment, but thanks to the Recycle, it's just that little bit less consistently that you're going to miss, even though it's not too big an issue anyway, but just nice having that little bit of a boost.
Yeah, and it looks like that'll do it here from us for the deck profile here. It looks super good. I'm super excited to see what the potential of this deck is going forward. Obviously, none of the new stuff we got was consistency based, so the same old Malamar problems are still going to plague it. But obviously, the strength of the deck once it's set up has obviously just increased that much more than it already was. So, yeah, super excited to see what this has to go for it in the future. And obviously, if you've been paying attention to how we structure our videos, this is probably going to go up against Nagalord for its last match and Malamar's first match. So, I'm excited to see how that plays out. Obviously, there's a lot of abilities in Nagalord, but also a lot of healing. So, it'll be cute to see that interaction between these two decks.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it'll be a matchup that's worth investigating because there's pros and cons to each side of the board for that matchup. I'd say the main thing I'm looking forward to with Malamar is trying out this new baby stuff on here. I'd say it has a lot of good potential going for it, and I'm excited to see how much of an impact it makes on the deck. As you said, it's still going to have inconsistency issues here and there, but I think it's strong enough that it can probably have a pretty bad start in some games and still end up being able to pull through.
Yeah, obviously it can come back from those bad starts even better now than it used to. But thanks for joining me today, Jordan.
Not a problem.
And if you enjoyed the video, then click the SAbleye in the center of the screen. On the left of the SAbleye will be some videos that YouTube thinks you like, and on the right will be Cosmic Eclipse Training Center playlist.
Yep.
But yeah, that'll do it for another video here from the SAbleyes. So yeah, see you all next time. Bye.